Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 460 chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it won't start. Well, as with all our running issue complaints, the first thing we do is look in the fuel tank. We fish out the fuel line here and the filter. This filter looks like it's brand new. We're going to take that filter off, put a pressure tester on the fuel line, and put 10 pounds of pressure on that line. What we're looking for is if the fuel line and the carburetor will hold that pressure. And in this case, it looks like it is holding the pressure. That's a good sign. Now let's pop the hood and see what we got going on under here. Well, first thing I notice is that there's fuel sitting on top of that cylinder. It's coming out of the decompression button, which is a sign that it's flooded. Looks like he's got a brand new air filter on here. Probably the two filters being new was a reaction to the saw not starting. I don't know what we got going on here.
I don't know what it is.
So let's look inside that cylinder. We want to look at the condition of the cylinder, make sure it's not scored. We want to look at the spark plug, which happens to be soaking wet with fuel. And we see fuel sitting on top of the piston as well. But the cylinder walls look good. So we did have spark. So that eliminates no spark as the reason why it's flooded. You know, it could be operator error, not knowing how to start the saw, but it's an older saw. The guy's had it for a while. He didn't forget how to... Oh, boy. Yeah, the right angle bit driver just took a bath in gasoline. That's an older tool and it's brushed. So I don't think I want to pull the trigger right now and have a little spark start that thing on fire. So we're gonna wipe it down, and
This is not brushless.
resist the urge to pull the trigger just to see what would happen. It won't take long for that fuel to flash off and dry, but we'll set it on the other bench and try and resist the temptation to do that. But boy, the saw was really flooded, wasn't it? So did the guy just pull and pull and pull and pull and flood it, or is there something else going on? And we're going to open up the carburetor and find out if it is in fact something else going on. There's 4 screws that hold the carburetor on. We got the top 2 off of there. This blue lever locks the throttle rod in place to the carburetor. And once we flex that out toward the clutch and lift it up, we can lift the throttle rod right out of the throttle arm on the carburetor. And then pop the whole piece of linkage right out of the trigger handle and out of our way. Now we're removing the air filter holder from the rubber saddles that holds it down. And now we're going to remove the fuel from the tank. This is a practice I think I'm going to start doing more toward the beginning of the repairs. I mean, with this funnel, it's easy enough to put the fuel back in if I have to. And it'll give me a good opportunity to really examine the fuel and look for maybe water or dirt. It's just that I never know where the repair is going to go when I start, so I don't always dump the fuel out right away. Now we got a big wet mess here. We're going to just wipe this down a little bit. Now with the air filter holder unlatched from the saddles there, we can remove the 2 screws on the bottom. There we go. Now the air filter holder is free to move except for the choke lever. And the choke lever is just snapped into a hole on the side of the carburetor, on the choke linkage. So we just pop that out of there. Now we're taking the short fuel line that goes from the carb to the primer. We're removing that. And now we're going to remove the main fuel line that comes from the fuel filter. Being kind of stubborn, but we got it. Still a lot of fuel in there. We kind of want to get that as dry as we can, so it'll be easier to start once we're done with our repair. So the 460 is the biggest saw in the Farmer Rancher series. Got a plastic crankcase. Anything bigger than this in the 5 series is going to have a metal crankcase. Here's our pump cover, and the fuel pump gasket looked fine. This side we have the metering diaphragm cover, 4 screws holding that down. Let's take a look at what this metering lever looks like. I'm sorry, metering diaphragm. The cover's stuck down. There's a couple of locating pins here. We just kind of put a screwdriver there and pop that cover. So this is probably the original metering diaphragm. It's stuck down pretty good. Yeah, they're not supposed to click, all right? So what we had going on was a stiff metering diaphragm that was holding the metering lever open, and in turn holding the needle open and allowing the saw to flood. So instead of it just calling for fuel when it needed it, it was offering fuel all the time. And that created our flooding situation. So we're going to put a new gasket down, a new diaphragm down, and screw the cover back down. You notice I didn't replace the needle. Didn't feel I needed to. On this side we have the micro screen here. Taking a look at this thing, I'd like to replace the micro screens. It's an important last step in keeping dirt and fuel, or dirt and schmutz, out of your carburetor. If I would have had just the gasket diaphragm kit, that's all I would have used. But I had the full kit here, so I'm only using the parts I want. And there's a lot of other parts in this kit that don't get used pretty much on a regular basis. Welch plugs. If I have to tear a carburetor that far down, and then what, put it in the ultrasonic cleaner, it's going to add a lot of time to the repair. And a lot of times it adds enough time to the repair that it would have been cheaper just to bolt a new carburetor on. So if I feel we get to the point where I have to go through all that extra labor, then I take a look at replacement cost of a carburetor. And it really has nothing to do with being lazy. It's all about how much money it's costing the customer. So our blue choke lever gets snapped back into the choke linkage on the carburetor. Trying to get things lined up here decent, and then we'll get a couple screws started. And we don't want to crank these things down with the driver. I'm just getting them close. And the final torque will be done manually. Taking a look at the alignment here of the carburetor. Making sure everything's straight before I just crank the screws in there. And also on that side, noticing that the purge line from the carburetor to the purge bulb needs to be replaced. So here I'm tightening the screws manually by hand, that last little bit of torque.
Gripes.
This bail wire popped off, that's no big deal. Just kind of spring loaded. No trigger though. We got to put this throttle rod in first. And this rubber dust boot, you'll notice that it really only can go one way. There's a couple of slots there that it drops into, but then it has a groove of its own on one edge, and that groove faces up. It would seal into the top cover. So that's how you know which way to put that dust cover or dust partition. There we go. That's how it should look with the groove facing up. Now we flex this blue lever toward the clutch a little bit and then up. And now we can drop that throttle rod into a hook on the carburetor linkage. And once it's in place, we snap the blue lever back down into place. Now we're going to cut a piece of hose for that short line between the purge bulb and the carburetor. Getting the length right on this is more important than you think. Because it's got a 90-degree bend in it, you don't want a kink in that fuel line. So once it's all installed, make sure that the line looks like it's got just gentle bends in it, not a hard kink. What are we looking for? Spark plug. Alright, we're gonna put this thing back together, try and start it, and if it does start, then we're going to let it sit overnight and try it again the next day and make sure it didn't flood while it was sitting there. Put some fresh fuel in it. And if it does start, then that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 460 that was terribly flooded. Thanks for watching. Later.